Hi everyone, Pooka here with two quick notes before today's episode. First, my audio quality in this one was pretty terrible for reasons unclear. I've done my best to clean it up, but it still sounds like I was shouting down the telephone from my swamp hut, which, actually, I was at the time. Anyway, apologies for that. Second, we'd like to encourage you to check out TryItCon, an online convention founded by friend of the show and fellow World of Darkness podcast host Terry Robinson in 2021 for people to try out new games. We're bringing it back this year in Terry's memory on November 7th, 8th, and 9th. Check out tryitcon.com, linked in the show notes, for info about how to sign up, the charity auction we'll be holding, and updates as we get all the pieces in place. Hope to see you there, but until then, here are some words about Changeling.
This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast, where all roads lead to Arcadia, but you never quite get there because the roadside dining is just out of this world. I'm Pooka, and joining me today is Fetch. Greetings, Fetch.
It's a pleasure to be here, and while Fetch might be my name and Pooka might be your name, I think at some point today we do have to give each other titles in keeping of the
Yes.
spirit of this game.
I'm open to that. I've always kind of thought, what would my titles be if I had titles? I mean, I say always, and by always, I mean in the immediate past. Because this book, it's important.
You think of one for me, I'll think of one for you, and then let's come back around to it when we get around to explaining what the heck titles are, because I think that's going to be one of the most exciting parts of what, I know I keep saying this, may be my favorite book yet.
I will attempt to dedicate some percentage of my brain capacity to this as we talk. Ideally in the back brain, because I need to focus on notes, of which there are many. Because yes, we are once again book diving into Equinox Road, the final book of the original run for the first edition of Changeling the Lost.
Yeah, this book is quite the stunner because this is, I think, the first of only two books that we get in the entire Chronicles of Darkness, which deals with high-level play. I'm excited for this. I was thrilled when it came out, and I'm thrilled by the reread.
This is, I think, the first one that I definitely don't remember reading. So I went in pretty fresh, the content all felt new to me.
Shall we talk about the back matter?
Yeah. Before the back matter, I just want to point out this lovely cover. Not my favorite of the original covers, but all of the original covers are great, so it's still great.
I had the same thought. For any other game line, this would have been my favorite cover.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, for this one, it's in maybe third place. We have for the audience who has to visualize this, picture a couple of shadowy figures stepping forward into a brightly lit hedgerow maze, towards the back and the far recesses of which we can see massive and ominous towers of an alien structure. And while all of that is in light, towards the back we have brambles and thorns, and what appear to be a pair of doves trying to escape, even while our protagonists go deeper.
But that's only the third best cover for the originals. Yeah, it's great.
It's captivating.
The back cover of this book indicates that this book will include a discussion of storytelling a Changeling endgame, from epic powers to epic threats, rules for travel to capital F Faerie, with many challenges and a simple story framework, the true Fae in their full glory, including a minigame for role-playing their singular Arcadian existence, and to new entitlements, weird evolution, and more. So honestly, I've hardly finished a chronicle of any type, and definitely not a Changeling the Lost one, so I'm not sure how they envisioned it supposed to go. Godlike final bosses are rarely a thing that appealed to me personally, so I kind of went into this thinking, well, I hope there's good character resolution tips and that it will really feel satisfying to enter Chronicle in this way. But I assume that you have probably finished more games than I have, so what were your expectations going into this?
I had a vague recollection of reading this many years ago, and The talk of how changelings become at high weird has been an inspiration for how I have dealt with a lot of more powerful changelings that show up in my games.
Hmm.
With the reread of this coming into it, I was really hoping to get more of that. And then I got even more than I expected out of this game. This does, for me, an excellent job of portraying what the end game looks like from both the player and the storyteller perspective, while also taking the previous books and putting them in new context.
Hmm. Right on. So we open it up, we get some art, and then, damn, this prologue story. I
Oh,
mean, damn, like, I think most of the ones we've seen have been overall pretty good, but this one, like, order of magnitude, the best, I would say.
I've got to agree. So this starts out with us shifting perspectives between a couple of people. We've got a changeling who's going to Faerie to recover somebody, and we don't know who they're going to recover. But they've brought some of their friends along, and it's gotten creepy because as everybody's gotten closer to Arcadia, it's become Pooka. I think it's the way you describe it makes it sound like when dreaming characters are going into the deep dreaming, how they're becoming
Hmm.
more archetypical versions of themselves, right?
For sure.
And meanwhile, we have this perspective of a mortal life where that same person is taking care of his father, who is going through dementia. But this person who's at home is not affected as we might expect, but rather it's just another changeling friend of that protagonist who has agreed to take on his face in the meantime and take care of his father. And it's honestly just hard stuff to read because I haven't dealt with somebody who's going through dementia. It felt like something real. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that aspect of it before I won't spoil the twist.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's not spoil the twist, because I really do think it's like, go read this story. I mean, I'm sure it's probably in the preview on Storytellers Vault, so you could just like read it through there. I thought it did a good job of kind of contrasting what a changeling might be going through in the mortal world if they still maintain their human connections. And I assume that the friend who's on Earth is like a mirror skin, kind of filling that role. But then, can you imagine like the end of this story if you actually pulled this in a game on your fellow players?
That's
That would just
one
be.
way to end a game.
Yeah, go read it. Well, link will be in the show notes.
Yes, please, by all means. So let's talk about what the book says it's going to be about. The stated theme of the book is endgame, and we're going to be hearing that a lot. Chapter 1, about playing high-powered, high-stakes games of Changeling. Exciting. We're going to get a bit of crunch in there. Chapter 2 promises storytellers info on how to handle these kinds of high-level games, and more crossover material, which is not what I would have guessed, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Chapter 3 is an in depth discussion of Faerie, including its inhabitants. And despite the fact we've had two previous books cover this, I think this shows that there's a lot more to say. And chapter 4 is the skeleton of an adventure storytellers can send their players on. I have some thoughts on that. And finally, our appendix promises a system for playing the true Fae.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to sit and wait for that one, folks. That is going to be very different from anything you can imagine.
So they link that idea of endgame to the exploration of Faerie and the return to Arcadia for one reason or another. And we've seen that kind of story arc before, but here they're keying it more to specific story beats and in particular the climax of an arc. The choice that's presented here is that you can return to Arcadia of your own free will, which leads to either embrace of the otherness of the Fae and the transcending of mortality, or rejecting it again in order to remain free and therefore mattering. And something about that dichotomy irks me, but I'm not sure what. I'll roll with it, I guess. It also sounds like we might get some exalted fair folk vibes in here from the introduction, which is great.
Yes. And the introduction ends with a note that because of the game's popularity, there's going to be more books.
Yay!
Yay! Literally what I have written in my notes.
Yeah. All right, so that takes us into Chapter 1, the third act.
What a name for the first chapter of the book. I got no idea what's going on in this intro story, though. Can you explain it to me?
Well, so my assumption is that, as represented in the quite gruesome art, there is a changeling who's become too Fae, capital F, to remain on Earth. And so, as his motley tries to keep him from returning to Arcadia, womp womp, he sprouts a bunch of branches and impales them all, and presumably then returns to what he now thinks of as home. Something like that.
This is going to lead into one of my favorite pieces. So,
Aha.
tell us about how we get to this story, which I think chapter 1 covers lovely.
Well, so we open with this note that endgame, the subject of discussion, is not the same as the end of a game. An endgame, as defined here, is the point where things have changed enough for characters and their situations that a grander story must close, but it can set up opportunities for a new one. Which raises the question, what are changelings like at that point in their evolution? Which is what you pointed to earlier. Like, what does a high weird changeling look like? How do their motivations change? How do their interactions with the worlds around them change? And yeah, it is the completion of a mode of play leading into a new one.
It's an especially interesting question to bring up because we've talked before about how the lost Fae compared to the dreaming Fae often seem like they're relatively human or low powered. So this chapter, I went in thinking, I wonder how much closer we'll be getting towards that ideal of the Fae that we see in dreaming.
How godlike will your character get? Yeah. Sort of the most immediate thing that we get is about how the mean changes. And really, it's just a bunch of examples, albeit beautifully worded ones, of how.
God, they're gorgeous.
And it kind of goes through various kiths, talks about how the means shift but also expand until they really start bleeding through the mortal mask. And mostly they're projecting vibes to people around them and influencing their surroundings. Lots of odor stuff, which was interesting. Like they talk a lot about what the smell is of a changeling at High Weird.
I thought that having those other effects, the non-visual ones, was great. And what really stuck with me was the ones where you evoke a mood. Like if
Mhm.
you're a runner swift, then creepily enough, people just start to see you as prey when they look at you because that's just the vibe that it might give off.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, it's going to vary from character to character, but just like how somebody who's intimidating might give off an intimidating aura because of their kith. I thought that whole mood thing was fascinating.
Yeah. And some of the little situational effects are almost like echoes, just not inherently disadvantageous.
Right?
There was one where it was like you might cause blue screens of death on computers around you if you're a wizened.
That's so
Things like
cool.
that. We do get some merits of mask and mean to help represent some of these things. So all of these require weird 6 or higher, but we have devotee, which gives you mortal retainers who all have severe derangements, so they might function as a cult or an overzealous group of assistants. There's many mask, which gives you extra masks that you can switch between without drawback.
They put the weird restriction on there that you can't change your gender, which happens later on in the book too. It's just one thing they will not let go of.
There's sublime, which is weird 9. Basically, it's just that others can almost hardly attack you. In exchange, though, the Fae, like, they want you to come home now.
This one is my favorite and has been a major piece of inspiration to me. I get the vibe that the Fae come to you going, "Hey, what are you doing here? It's weird. Are you lost? Did you get stuck here?"
Well, they are lost.
Oh, great, yeah, okay, Pooka, just come down here. We're gonna go down the wide road. We'll take you home, the mansion. It's gonna be great. You want to go home, right?
We'll get a Manticore finger club sandwich at the diner on the way. Yeah, things like that. We also have Token Master, which just kind of creates tokens out of objects you handle.
That's
This
so
can
good.
be beneficial or cause headaches. And then Weirder to Skill makes you supernaturally good at a skill to the exclusion of others. This one is actually my favorite because starting at Weird 6, it is a little bit more attainable for, I would say, starting characters. It's also slightly reminiscent of mantles from C20 Shiokain. So, like, if you're trying to get into the embodiment of playing an archetype and thinking about how that might conflict with other aspects of your character, this is a good way to kind of highlight your hyper focus on a particular aspect of your story.
Oh, that's an interesting point, especially given that once you hit Weird 6 plus, readers, keep in mind, this is the point when you can start taking your attributes and your abilities above 5.
Yes. And we do get in the next section some more thorough description of that for each seeming and each kith. Only the core book ones, unfortunately. Well, I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah, as a changeling evolves, their word, past Weird 6, mechanically, the seeming blessing and curse intensify at each step from 7 through 10, and the kith blessing gets a bump at Weird 7. Narratively, we get the deeper dives here into those behavioral changes and impact on surroundings, kith by kith. There is a comment on how some lost believe these changes are controlled but subconscious, and then others say they're as much in the grip of the weird as the weird is in the changeling's own. And so I like moments like that throughout this book. As with the opening tale, it points into how to get into the psychology that these characters are moving through. I do kind of wish that the book gathered that all into one place. Like something which I think I've pointed to, I forget which book we talked about this, maybe it was Winter Masks. When you have like Storyteller's Guide and Player's Guide distinctions, I feel like there's a less emphasis on players' guides for like actually helping players bridge the gap into their character. It gives you information about like, here's what characters of certain types might think and how they might act, etc., etc. But there's not as much advice for actually narrating that as a player into the story beats in the same way as a storyteller gets. And some of that is scattered through here. It's just you have to kind of be looking for it, I think, to really kind of gather it together. I don't know. It was great though. It was nice to see all of these in detail. I don't think we need to go through them all in detail, but if you have any favorites, I have a few. What were yours?
I'm just going to give one. My favorite is the Grave Light, which opens up with basically, you're dead. Your heart may have stopped beating, and it goes on like this. I love it. At Weird 7, your charnel sight, the ability where you can spend some glamour and see ghosts, now becomes innate. You can view ghosts with no expenditure of glamour, whether you'd like to or not. Love it.
Yeah, and you probably won't want to, so it's not as great as it might seem at first. Yeah, I think mine were the mirror skin kind of feeling that they could become truly identityless, and I will always go to bat for the oracles. Seemings overall, the shifts for the wizened are interesting mechanically in terms of the kind of getting bonuses on like dexterity rolls and crafts rolls and the sort of broad spectrum doing things rolls. I also like the shifts to the fairest, but it really leans into that weird equals derangement idea, which is like maybe not for everybody.
One of the things I love about all of this, and it's easy to overlook, is that you can only really get a picture of how powerful your characters are getting if you are combining all these optional systems presented throughout the book, including this. Because
Hmm.
Changeling, as they explain in more detail later, is a game where you have a lot of little powers that add up to being able to do a ton more stuff than most of the other splats are capable of.
That being said, some of these, in comparison with something like the Augmen in Dreaming, like Waterborne at Weird 7 can swim at triple speed. Wow! I'm like, is that really that great? I don't know. But I mean,
I mean, if we're going to talk about things I don't like about Kith's blessings, we're going to be here all day.
we'll make a list later. Overall, though, I don't think there's anything truly unexpected here. Like, all these changes are logical outgrowths and intensifications of what we've already seen about Seemings and Kiths. Certainly, there's a lot of mixed blessing stuff going on, and I do wish that the ones from Winter Masks had been included here, because I had a lot of favorite Kiths in there.
They reference the other books in this book a lot. I would have gladly have given them another 25, 40 pages to just keep giving us more material.
Or just consistency in font size, because this is another case where it's like the
Oh
font
no.
suddenly embiggens on page 18, and I'm like, well, that's some words that you could have saved anyway.
But speaking of mixed blessings, I see here on page 24 we have this beautiful picture of someone relaxing in some sort of garden grove with some sort of like gorgeous castle behind them. seems totally normal. Tell me about
They
this
are the
section called
garden.
the yeah, becoming nightmare seems like a weird title for something that looks like it's so good for you. What's this all about?
Yeah. Well, so this points to, again, what I was really looking for in here, the phenomenology of getting to this point in your evolution. Largely, it's grounded in like dreams and sleep and what happened, including having to roll clarity when you wake up in the morning.
It's an optional system. This is about becoming a true Fae, and it's explicitly storytellers and players both have to buy in to the
Yeah.
transformation beginning. Then you start having the wake up every day and rolling clarity.
Yeah. And the ultimate point is that it's mechanically easy to stem the tide by venting your weird and getting rid of a dot. It's the lack of willingness to do so that's the problem. The hedge feels too much like home. And after all of the hallucinations and derangements and compulsions that start cropping up, if you reach Weird 10 and fall to Clarity 0, that will push your character to the point that they're not really playable anymore as changelings. All they want is to return to Faerie and become Big F Fae. And when they're Weird 10, basically nothing is going to stop them. You can keep playing that character using perhaps the minigame in the appendix, but I think we've said this before. This is a case where increasing the power stat, you can eventually lose the game. It's concretely, you can't play your character anymore. Maybe that's a win for you, but you know. There's also this sidebar with notes on crossover for spirit magic and stuff, but whatever, I'm not
Yeah.
interested.
I want to emphasize again that this is optional if you have a game where you want your characters to be able to get up to Weird 10, but they don't turn into True Fae. That's fine. Nothing stops you from doing that. And the amount of experience that would be required to get to that point and then get your stats up high enough to make that relevant is enough that you could just keep playing for a good long while.
Although I don't think necessarily. This book, it's all about getting to that point, and there's actually comparatively little on continuing to play at that point. But that's a broader comment for later, maybe. So then,
Contracts.
contracts and how to forge them. Primarily, first from a narrative story point of view, they go through these 4 steps. There's forging the initial Lesser Alliance pledge, performing a Greater Endeavor task, setting the contract's terms, and writing the contract into the weird. So what do those mean? Well, first, the Alliance. The Changeling will make a pledge with something, some aspect of reality, through a proxy. And I like the example they give here where they say the contracts of eternal spring used an orchard in full bloom on a warm and breezy sunlit spring day as their vector for spring as a concept with which they then swore their contract.
Easy to understand.
Yeah. And this is counted as a lesser alliance pledge with a facet of reality that requires an appropriate sanction which takes actual effort. So really there's a lot of flexibility to determine what that means if you're going to go through this. The changeling will probably have to keep that pledge for at least a year and a day, and it will end immediately if the sanction is broken. But after a full month, then you enter the endeavor phase, where you spend a dot of willpower and swear to perform a difficult, time-consuming, risky, etc., greater endeavor that will strengthen the appropriate facet of reality. There is a sidebar here that's like, do not break this part because it will go badly for you.
It's quite the challenge. The first part of it about the Alliance is similar to the previous system we had in, I think, Rites of Spring, about how you could do goblin pledges with
Yeah.
reality to do something quick and short, and you promise to not do something in exchange. And we see that play out here as well. However, this is a much bigger obligation, and the endeavor itself can be pretty big. It's supposed to be stuff that would catch the attention of an entire large town or district of a city, they say.
Oh, what if climate change is just an endeavor for someone to do an eternal summer?
Oh my god. Oh,
Okay, too dark. Too dark.
banality. The banality. What have you done to me?
Anyway, so once the endeavor is accomplished, you set the terms of the contract, and this is where you actually craft the clauses with mechanics that we will get to shortly. Now, you are effectively temporarily warping reality every time you invoke these, and so it costs a dot of willpower every time you invoke it, which is a
Ugh.
lot. Alternatively, if you're doing goblin contracts, you can just have some kind of mythic backlash. And it's not clear to me if, like, are you supposed to actually be putting dots on your sheet at this point, or you're just doing stuff in the abstract that the storyteller is allowing? I guess the latter.
I think it's the latter. I think it's fiat. You've done this. Go ahead and just you get 5 dots of contracts, but you're spending a dot of willpower every time you cast them. Have fun.
Yeah. And if you want to avoid that dot of willpower cost, once you're through the year and the day or however long the storyteller decides, you finalize the deal by extending the contract to all lost. You do this by entering the hedge, and in a place where you won't be disturbed, perform a powerful sacrifice. This can be giving up an attribute dot or a 5 dot token, or slaying a true fae, no big deal, plus a bit of your own blood, and this binds the contract into the weird so that others can learn it. There are also some notes here about exceptionally powerful contracts, like the goblin contracts of sacrifice, or the ones used to create a court, and those require like groups of lost and extra permanent willpower. But also, there are some cool side effect bonuses for creating contracts at all, because now that aspect of reality just kind of likes you.
I loved this system for how you go about creating a new connection with an aspect of reality such that you actually get to make your own contracts. It's just very, very cool.
Yeah.
Pooka, what is the thing that you think you'd be most easy to give up? Token, true fae, attribute dot?
Oh, attribute dot, just buy it back. If the story of creating this contract hasn't garnered you enough experience to just buy it back quickly, then you're probably doing it wrong.
I suppose that's fair. I was going to say go with a token because, I mean, look,
Yeah.
I know 5 dot tokens are meant to be impressive, but I've never been overall that impressed with the token, so I think I could make the sacrifice in a way that I would feel much worse about if this was changing the dreaming.
Yeah, they may not be 10 a penny, but they're definitely a dime a dozen. I agree with you that this is a great system for players to design contracts, but like if you're a storyteller, just write your own damn contract. It's fine. If you do want to go through the mechanics of it though, then we get those steps. We are told that a new contract should clearly relate to a singular aspect of reality in physical and metaphorical ways. It should be connected to fair folk mythemes, both in terms of what they can accomplish and the vibes of using them. There's a handy reminder that within the context of the World of Darkness setting here, fate and time have deep connections to Arcadia, so those are like important things to consider. And the details of how these contracts work matter. So don't just like hand wave and say, I'm going to make a contract of blowing things up. It's like, no, you have to be a little bit more delicate than that. Structurally, clauses build one on top of another, but shouldn't be redundant. Don't just have level 3 be a more potent level 1. Look for
Good.
synergies rather than directly scaling things up. With the power of clauses of various dot levels, the general guidance is to use the existing contracts for inspiration and to focus on things like increasing areas of effect or competitive advantage, treat the level 5 power as the culmination of the contract's power. Instant kill effects are forbidden, but I think we had at least one of those, right? Maybe it was a
We do
goblin contract.
when the goblin sacrifice contracts lets
Yeah,
you do an instant kill on somebody.
yeah.
But
So
again,
much for that advice.
they always cost you something to do. But hey, I mean, instantly killing somebody is pretty good
It's
effect.
a thing.
Yeah.
There are some other limits that they set here. No altering the past, no permanently creating life, no raising the dead, no changing mortals into changelings, or vice versa. You can only bend those rules. But things like illusions and luck and emotions and temporary physical changes are all fair game. Take inspirations from dream logic, just don't let it get too silly.
I thought that this was a very good section with a lot of great advice for explaining both how to make a new set of powers and their logic behind what the powers should feel like. I was also
Mhm.
heartened when they said something like, it should feel whimsical. The book never gets into saying, make the game lighthearted, but you're meant to be having fun with these powers. It's supposed to be cool and fun to do the kinds of things that Fae get to do. That's meant to be a major part of this game. I like that.
Yeah, and whimsical can be twisted. It's the difference between ooh and ooh.
I like the way you phrase that. I had a couple of other thoughts on this section. One, which is that I was not really a fan of them bringing up the remember Arcadia exists and time and fate. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, but like we've established that whether or not they're the same thing is meant to be a question that the book even talks about later on. I think you could have excised that one section. I also loved the part where they explained how contracts are a little weaker than other supernatural's powers because A, changelings get them for cheaper than anybody else does, and
Hmm.
B, changelings have a lot of other things that they can do. They are very broad in their utility set.
Yeah, the whole opening a door to step out of the world, it's like, well, I guess the wolves can do that, but vampires are going to be like, what? So there are also a bunch of like specific bullet point mechanical notes that I don't think we really need to go deep into. Just kind of very
Oh, I'm
broadly,
ready to talk about reflections.
yeah, very broadly, every clause will have a dice pool and cost glamour, which scales up as we see in other contracts. Most effects are instant by default. Successes can be scalar, especially if they give a bonus or a penalty, and living targets can contest things that have an all or nothing effect. Possible targets can be other fae, the changeling themselves, or aspects of the natural world. Catches should require effort, but be reasonable. All seems fine. If this is the process that the authors used for the example that we get, then it's helpful to know that guidance. With that example, though, the contracts of reflection, which is totally not the same as the contracts of mirror. Uh,
I think that while I appreciate them trying to make a distinction, I really wish they'd gone for something more different
yeah,
conceptually.
in order, it's well, you have to use a reflective service to affect the contract, but in order, that lets you gaze back in time to see what that surface has reflected, look out of another reflective surface that you've encountered, reach through to grab objects from the other side, step through the reflective surface like a portal, and pull out reflections of items from the mirror. It was helpful to see for each clause they included these notes kind of outlining the thought process and justification. That's great. But yeah, like as a thing, I was just kind of like, yeah, I wouldn't take this.
Personally, I would take these powers because I think the ability to do things like level 2 is kind of like Tattletale from Changing the Dreaming, which is useful. Being able to see the reflection of something in the past is nice. Grabbing copies of things and walking through mirrors, I think this is a pretty good set of abilities.
Interestingly, I made a nearly identical art like way back, even before the forum days. When Changeling the Dreaming was still being actively published, I made
No
such an
way.
art. And from the vague bits I recall, I kind of feel like this one is clunkier than what I made. It just makes me wonder, like, rendering this in Dreaming, how would it function differently? And without getting into the mechanical weeds of it, I kind of feel like Dreaming, it goes more smoothly. I don't know. I'll sit
The
with it. I don't hate it,
I'll tell
but
you what I think may be behind that. It's that there's the loopholes and the restrictions about having to have senior reflection and it being within the last week. There's a lot of caveats within this power, and honestly, a lot of lost powers that you
hmm,
don't get with the very flexible system from Dreaming.
yeah, I guess it's fine. The last bit of this chapter, we get some Eldritch Orders. As a reminder, these are the super powerful entitlements for Swold Changelings. I'm going to fly through these briefly, and then maybe let's talk about favorites.
Sure.
So we have the Charmed Circle, just sort of a refreshingly honest take on the self-importance of Fae with titles. They're not at all secret about their allegiance because they see themselves as the true leaders. And with Weird 7, Mantle 5 as requirements, they have a good case for it. They make a one-time offer to those they deem worthy of joining, who mostly are freehold monarchs for their courts. Certainly you need awesome social stats, but you'd better follow what the council decides by consensus that you should do. Concepts include Beneficent Empress, Braggart King, Brutal Tyrant, Martyr Queen, Once a Hero / Now a Ruler, Poet Lord, and Sovereign Monster. You get 5 dots of social merits,
That's good.
the power to bless or curse those you designate as friend or foe once per story, and a gilded torque that can steal or grant entire skills. Pretty great.
Yeah, of all four of these that we're going to get, I think all four of them have really good powers compared to most of what we've seen in the previous books, even the previous Eldritch Orders.
Yeah. Next up is the Knights of the Widow's Walk, deep cover spies who join to escape their situation or redeem themselves from one kind of fall from grace or another, sometimes also to save their own skin, because if you don't join, they'll kill you. You need social skills, because you're a spy, as well as skills that fit your new cover. The Knights are apparently an ancient order, but they are so secret that even most of their members don't know all the details or even each other. Assignments come in from somewhere with a mysterious wax seal. So, spy stuff.
They're led by the Spy Master, who I have thoughts on in a second, but please continue.
Yeah. So their concepts include damaged goods with new lease on life, habitual liar, hollow man mirror skin, low clarity assassin, masked paramour, pretend victim, and smooth talking mole. Privileges: you can shift your mien and your mask, you can smell lies, and you gain glamour from telling lies. Good for them.
Yeah, the part to smell lies is really good. My only complaint is, aside from the really cool powers they get, I don't get why this is an eldritch entitlement. You're just somebody who's
Mm.
really down on their luck and things are not going very well for you. And then they show up and say, hey, why don't you join us? And that doesn't feel like a weird six kind of life. Either you're probably doing pretty good for yourself at that point, or you're the kind of person who's maybe not going to do very well with what they're asking of you. This
I mean,
feels a lot like that winter one from the Lords of Summer, the ones who have like the fog over their mouth.
yeah.
I just didn't feel like this belonged here.
To be fair, I often feel that way about like a non-zero number of super spy movies. I'm like, why did you recruit this person? Anyway, next is the Parliament of Victors. This
Oh
is an
yeah.
entitlement for winners, popular heroes and champions, often of the combative type. Anything where they're the best, with a capital the and the. But you have to keep acting the part to stay in. Your meme becomes larger than life. You get a double heap of swagger, and there can be only one per freehold. But they do meet up sometimes to compete and whatnot. Basically, you're just a super version of whatever you represent. Concepts include corn-fed golden boy, fallen hero, haughty draconic, one-woman army, preening Adonis, sore loser, or violent supermodel, which is by far the best out of all those concepts. Naturally, you get bonuses on physical rolls, you get the striking looks merit, and once per session, a mighty blow feat, and you lose access to all of those if you fail at a challenge or a notable task. They contrast them with the sacred band of the golden standard we saw previously. The victors see themselves as the big brothers who embody their concept in the moment. They don't really care much about anyone else or about unity in the same way.
I thought they were a lot of fun to read about, even if their powers are underwhelming. I get that Mighty Blow lets you add your weird to a attack roll, which is going to be helpful at that point, but you already have things like the base, I think like beast ability to just add on to your brawl rolls by spending glamour. It's more efficient. I'm just not over impressed with it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's pretty funny that it specifies that your attack is flashy no matter how much or how little damage it does. And the fact that there can be only one per freehold is just perfect for being kind of a jerk to everybody. Haha, it's me. I'm the best. Only me.
Kind of like Clash of the Titans meets Highlander meets Zoolander or something. Lastly, we get the Office of the Vizierial Council. These are sorcerer advisors to freehold monarchs. Basically, it's the Crystal Circle for Lost. Founded by a mass-murdering lunatic autumn wizard of long ago, but I love the drop of the Lelokin myth because that's a really cool Welsh myth.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah. Also turns up in Dreaming as an Elder Hieledul. The Order channels high weird and mystical power towards practical ends, which helps keep them grounded and not losing clarity so much, but they are dripping with weird in their mien in a way that reflects their nature. They do need to actually earn their keep as advisors, but they're expected to be neutral and independent, and indeed they lose their entitlement if they betray a monarch, which immediately leads to a clarity loss. Concepts include ancient witch, beleaguered soothsayer, court jester whose punchlines contain wisdom, deceitful puppet master, neglected advisor, power behind the throne, and silent observer. Your privileges are that you never age, you get a bonus to resist derangement effects and to clarity, and you get experience point discounts on new clauses to contracts if it's justifiable, which is huge.
Yeah, all contracts now cost only XP times 2, which is incredibly good.
Yeah.
I was surprised that they had the part where you just stop aging altogether. That's the only way in this game I know of that you can do that, and that's really cool.
Although you can still get quite old as a normal changeling.
That is also
Well,
true.
normal, as normal as a changeling can be.
I just think it's funny to imagine that there's some vizier who's been around for literally 700 years advising some court.
The Yodas. So that's the end of the chapter. Overall, there is quite a bit to work with. I don't know if the description of what it's like to be a high weird changeling has yet given me enough grist for the mill in this book to actually play a character along that arc, but it helps. The merits are fine. The contract development system is fine. Narratively, I love it. Mechanically, I think it might be a little bit more than necessary. And the example that tumbled out the other side, I was, it's fine. The Eldritch Orders are cool, especially the first and the last one. So yeah, overall, decent.
I liked it a lot because it did what I would want out of something high tier, which is it gave me a ton of tools for doing stuff. So many different merits you can use to change your play style. The optional rules for how your seeming and kiths can change over time. The buy-in system for how you might become true Fae, the idea of being able to make your own contracts, and the new Eldritch Orders. I think that any one of these by themselves, maybe not enough, but putting it all together, I think this gives you enough new options that it really can help you get a high play vibe. Even if I do agree, it would be nice to have more general advice over what kinds of adventures can you tell at this high tier. We are going to be talking about that in chapter 2 and 4, but it's going to be a limited slice.
Yeah, I was going to say this chapter, I would have survived with less crunch and more concrete examples of how these changelings behave on Earth. That's like really what I think I was missing from it. But I mean, all of the narrative stuff, like any of the non-crunch stuff, I was like, yes, I am on board for this. The crunch stuff was fine. I didn't need it to the same degree, maybe. I don't know. But like, easy 8 out of 10 for sure. By contrast,
Would you like to talk about some
so
twisted tales?
well, I would. Just before we get to that though,
Sure.
like the chapter we it's kind of I feel mean saying this. The prologue art and fiction was like, wow, that's incredible. The chapter 1 art and intro fiction, I'm like, whew, that's pretty heavy. The chapter 2 intro art and the chapter 2 prologue fiction, uh, like it's
Okay,
there.
good. So it's not just what is this about? I don't understand what's going on. I know they're preparing for something, but I'm not sure what.
They're about to begin a twisted tale, I guess. It's just kind of filler. I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the art has that weird smoothed over look where I know it's not AI, but it just doesn't feel quite right.
Well, it's Brian LeBlanc digital painting stuff. So, but tell us about chapter 2.
All right. So, chapter 2, Twisted Tales. This is going to be some storytelling advice. Now, I, as the forever storyteller,
Oh,
have been given the task of talking about the storytelling chapters of this game. A idea that I would relish more if there was more new content to speak of. Unfortunately, as we're going to see both here and in chapter 4, a lot of this is stuff that any storyteller should already know about running a game. So rather than me run our audience through every piece of advice in this section, I'm just going to say overall, it is good, it is worth a read, but I'm just going to give you 6 highlights about it, which are 1. First favorite idea. Ground the epic conclusion in the story being told rather than speculating about how things will go. Which means that from the beginning, if you're thinking, oh boy, I can't wait for them to get to Faerie and go deal with a big castle of glass, and you tell them all about it, everybody might get excited about it. But if you don't connect that to anything that's happening in here, you're all going to be underwhelmed by the actual experience. I think that was a nice
yeah.
reality check.
What do they say? Hype isn't play? Something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Hype is exciting, but it isn't play. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Point number 2, a sidebar. If you want a chosen one narrative,
Ugh.
be sure the other characters are valuable and consider subverting the narrative. It's a neat idea.
I find that players often decide they want a chosen one narrative, and it's them, and it's really
I
annoying.
have not seen that come up in my games,
Oh,
but
you're
I do
lucky.
like the idea of it happening and everyone has the buy-in of, okay, we're going to have you being stuck being the chosen one, and then it's just going to be very difficult for you.
The problem is that when more than one player decides that they're the chosen one without anyone else buying in. So
That is a very different kind of game, and I can see the problem.
yeah, my stuff. Carry on.
Point number 3. Do not worry about the long-term consequences.
Hey.
You're going to Faerie. Everything's going to end. Do whatever you want with the setting. Have Arcadia crash into the mundane world. Destroy the hedge. Make all hobgoblins turn into true fae. Whatever you want. It's
All
refreshing.
of the above.
Point 4. Even small but symbolic gestures, such as defeating just one of the gentry, can have big effects upon the setting. This is touching to me because it goes to show that you don't need your climax of the game to be the story about how your motley destroyed all of the Fomorians and freed the Dreaming forever from endless winter, to put it in changing the Dreaming terms. If you can show in Lost that your characters can decisively destroy one of the gentry, that is a symbol that other changelings will look to and can serve as a groundwork for much bigger changes in the setting overall. Beautiful touch.
That also ties in nicely to the point they make that the end of a game or the end of a chronicle doesn't mean that the corner of the setting in which you've placed that chronicle needs to end. Like, you can start new stories that refer back to the actions of even a different group of characters.
Yes, and I'm going to actually skip over point 5 for a moment because what you said there reminded me of point number 6.
Uh-huh.
I love the idea of epic troops, where the game switches focus between several different groups of different tiers of power and interests to tell a cohesive story. I've done troop play in Ars Magica, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun. You should try it. This takes it to a new level because you are explicitly taking your story from different perspectives. So one story might be the tale of the Changelings, your traditional motley. A second story can be a bunch of hapless mortals who are just caught up in these bigger events and don't know what's going on. A third one might be a side group of motley halfway across the world working on something related to it that they never get to see the conclusion of because what they do there ties back into the main story. And your fourth group of characters could be a literal group of true fae who use a storyteller tell this is what you want. You want to recover this one specific mortal, and you don't tell them why. The idea of switching between all four of those things is fantastic and cool. I think it would be one of the biggest challenges of my storytelling
Yeah.
career to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of the same mind. I was like, this is really interesting. I have no idea how I would do it. This requires a separate chapter all itself. But I'm curious what number 5 was, since you skipped over.
Number 5 was the one bit of really big mechanical crunch in this section, creating narrative seasons, which this kind of felt like maybe it should have been in the book about seasons.
Didn't we get something like this in, was it Winter Masks, where it was like the additional rules to reflect the vibes of each court? Like, you could give everybody essentially Mantle 1 during the season, something like that.
Oh yeah, they did have something like that, but it wasn't Pooka, it wasn't as cool as this.
Fair.
So the idea of narrative seasons is that you can change the game's narrative to reflect the vibe of a court's season, whether or not that court is in power, by radically altering how the rules work for one aspect of play. For example, in summer, you just win against mortals. They just can't do anything for you. And in spring, social rules are all go big or go home. If you apply the narrative seasons, you will radically change how your game plays, and that is just so cool.
Yeah. I don't know if you felt like how this measures up to other storytelling buckets of advice that you've gotten. My sense is that there were cool bits like that. Overall, this was fine. A lot of it was standard. But I did keep feeling like, yeah, this would work for setting up, running, and concluding your first session in a game as much as your last. Like, with the possible exception of, by the way, your players can also embody true Fae this session. Like, okay, maybe that shouldn't be in the beginning of a chronicle. But otherwise, it's good advice overall.
Yes, that's true. This could have all been in the core book. But hey, I took 6 useful points out of 11 pages of content, so I'm okay with that. Anything else to add before I go on to the crossover material?
I will telegraph myself by saying they mention in the crossover intro that theme dilution is a possible issue to address. So I thought, will they actually address it? Spoiler, no, they do not. I mean, you are much more practiced at running World of Darkness Revised / Chronicles of Darkness than I am, so I'm going to let you highlight the bits you want here. I have like one or two things for each that I was like, yeah, that's cool, but go for it.
Similar. After some general advice about crossovers, it gets into specifics of how to use each in your games. This includes compatible themes, concerns, and new mechanics. I think all of it's worth a read for anybody who's interested in bringing them into your games, but I don't want to talk about every little bit of it. So, again, I'm just going to give you my 6 favorite tidbits. Number 1. Vampires can eat certain goblin fruits, like blood fruit. What an interesting thing to put a vampire in. Here's a place where you can finally have something other than just literally blood. Tempting. Point 2. Spirits can become hobgoblins. Spooky because it's completely changing what they are in the game. It would be the equivalent of saying that if a spirit from World of Darkness went into the dreaming and it just turned into a chimera after some time. Is that a thing in dreaming?
It's not a thing, but I think a lot of people do that.
Huh.
Just for ease of mechanical whatever.
Point number 3. Mages cannot use life magic on the thorns, capital T, because the thorns are not really plants. Point 4. Mages cannot magically leave the hedge because entering the hedge is inherently an oath. I think it's a little questionable whether that should be an oath that you're making, but okay. I think it's really funny that a mage tries to teleport out and then finds out it doesn't work.
I'm all for curtailing the power of mages.
Point 5. An in-depth discussion of Mages Arcadia versus Changelings Arcadia, and the interesting things you could do whether or not they are the same. Honestly, I found the idea of what if they're not the same, the ideas they had for that, to be as compelling as the ones they had for if they happen to be the same. And I thought it was a very well thought out discussion of something that the books kept hinting at for 5 books on by now. And finally, Prometheans do not gain a lot of their benefits and drawbacks, including coming back from the dead, because the hedge has no deal with divine fire. Oh
I
no.
loved that. So many consequences, but I love it.
What do you have to add to the section about our other supernatural friends?
Not much. I kind of for each one. So like for vampires, I thought the comment on vampires and changelings having different but equally weird relationships with time was pretty cool. Werewolf, thinking about how the hedge would react to Erotha psychology, it was goofy to think about. Mage, I think had more information than like all the rest put together. Which,
It's the Arcadia thing, man.
yeah, and that was the most interesting piece out of their thing. But the motivations for crossover is always what I look for, and I thought those were better articulated for Mage than the others, talking about like discovery or revenge or just deeply human concerns, because the mages are still the most human out of all of these, well, except for hunters. But so like addressing that is something I would have liked the others to do more concretely. And then Promethean, yeah, the sort of divine fire thing, I was like, ooh. But obviously, the similarity of fetches to Prometheans is something to explore. The idea of there being a refinement of iron would raise some eyebrows. I don't know. I think there's a lot more potential for Promethean crossover than they allow for here, but that's because I love Promethean. Oh, and Hunter, Nothing Burger. So
Yeah.
I guess it was the newest game at the time, so there wasn't much to say about it, but
They did get some supplements, but I don't think that they would have changed anything that we see here.
okay. Do you feel that these bits added more value to crossover than what we had already gotten?
Oh, certainly.
All right.
I think that they are good points of discussion for people who are trying to combine the games because it's a frank discussion of what are the concerns if you want to do a crossover. And conversely, what are the advantages and opportunities? If you're a storyteller who is thinking about having a crossover game, you should read this section because it will give you a reality check on what is going to happen to your changeling game if you have a vampire or a mage as part of that. So, read the sections that interest you.
Yeah, I guess it kind of felt to kind of tie it back into the chapter as a whole, which I think was also, no, maybe not the shortest. I think chapter 4 is even shorter. But like the storyteller advice was sensible and the crossover mechanics and everything were helpful. I don't know how much of it was truly new, but again, it didn't feel like it was focused on endgame. It read more like reminders along the lines of, hey, if you haven't explored these corners of storytelling or techniques or introduced crossover in your chronicle yet, the end of your chronicle is the last chance to do so. So let's shovel it all in here. I feel personally, if I wanted crossover in my game, I would try and get all of that organized at the start. But I guess better late than never.
I think you have a good point that this would have belonged better in maybe Rites of Spring for dealing with other supernatural things. Seems like that would have been a big part of that book's deal.
Or just a generic World of Darkness crossover book, which seems like the natural thing you would make in this context.
There is kind of that way later in the line, but that is a discussion
Mhm.
unto itself. Suffice to say, yeah, I don't think this belongs in the book about ending the game, but if you've got no other place you were going to put the information, it might as well be here, and if you've got this book, you might as well read it. I think it's just interesting to read
Yeah.
on its own terms and really useful if you want to do a crossover.
So now we come to the heart of the matter. Chapter 3. This is a big chapter.
It's all about Faerie and the
Yeah.
inhabitants thereof. Mm.
Again. Something I noticed interestingly with the opening fiction here, which is an artfully dreamlike story of someone defeating question mark a keeper. They seem to be doing this trope where each of the stories has the phrase "I love you" with very different purposes, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, I did not realize that.
Yeah.
What I was thinking about is that I don't think this is just some person. I think this is two of the true Fae in a feud with each
Oh,
other.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Welcome to the first story that we have in the entire game line where the actors are just the Fae.
Yeah. Speaking of Just the Fate, we've already had a few opportunities to explore their details, from theories about their nature to different ways they can be antagonists to the relationships they have with changelings. Presumably, this chapter will collect some of that and dive deeper, but we're also getting a lot about the realm of Arcadia itself. And we saw a bit of that in, I think it was Winter Masks, with like the realms that can spawn different kiths. But here it's a little more structural about like what are the mechanics and metaphysics of Arcadia as a space. I'm going to ask you a question actually to start, because we begin with this bit about the storyteller's curse, which is a little over the top. Calm down, book. But they insist that here they're going to focus on practical matters to help present the true Fagin stories in a more authentically interactive way. Have you had particular difficulty or issues with designing true Fae in Chronicles that you've run?
Yes, I have, because most of my running with it has been in second edition, and it took me a while to understand what the true Fae were meant to be like, even after having read the chapter once. And I feel like this chapter put the second edition context in much clearer light.
Okay.
The problem with portraying the true Fae is finding a way to make them feel alien and yet something that you can interact with in a way that is interesting. You don't want to frustrate players, and that's very easy if the Fae have nothing you can predict about them. And
Mhm.
conversely, there's a question of how do I do a story about the Fae that are meant to be these terrifying godlike beings if the ones that get set up are things that you could take by taking 5 dots in boxing?
Fair point, though. And I mean, it's especially tough when your players are humans, like, and you are storytelling as a human. So defining incomprehensibility is kind of a self-defeating prospect. I do think the way they try to approach that is interesting in here, which we'll get to, but yeah, point stands. So we start off with talking about names and title, and they matter because they define the gentry more than any kind of biography would. Names are promises to be a will that binds the weird. That's the quote that I actually really like that. And titles are contracts with the weird that give the Fae a necessary obligation and purpose. And they can have more than one, but they matter. This is followed by nature and needs. So for the Fae, things like bodies and nourishment are optional, but as with any being, distinguishing identity is necessary. They have this fluid nature that can actually work against them because of their lack of material existence. They are where they dwell, and they are their experiences. Without distinction and conflict to define themselves as beings, they dwindle with a capital Dwa back into just formless Arcadian matter. The intriguing note here is that humans' inherent duality as mortal creatures strengthens the gentry's own sense of self, and likewise the psychic boundaries that created in Arcadia. It's a very trippy and philosophical take on this. Again, strong Fairfolk Exalted vibes and some Dark Ages Fae vibes. But there's this idea of willing the self into existence, but needing to create delineation where none existed. And that's kind of an underlying metaphysical point that I thought was really cool to highlight.
I found it compelling, almost humanizing.
Almost. Not quite, but almost. And then in terms of how much do changelings know this, not as much as they think. And each court and each individual changeling has conflicting info. Individual lost will have their own experience of their keeper. The courts have their specialty knowledge, but generally they don't share freely. From the individual side, maybe because it's traumatic to kind of relive those bits of information. From the court side, it's like you think they'd compare notes a little bit more, but court's gonna court. We then have mutable and immutable forms, which talks about how the keepers are chaos, but they are still bound by laws which the lost don't know beyond having fragments. The storyteller should know the laws, though. That's important. The true Fae tend to swear on their names and titles in order to enact Fae contracts to empower themselves or their avatars or their chosen subjects as needed. In terms of the oaths and contracts, they won't violate a contract sworn on their own names because it would be self-annihilating, but keepers have different perspectives on what actually constitutes an oath. This is the trope of like exact wording matters. And for the true Fae, oaths are defined by their enforceability. Like, they can say things without meaning them and think nothing of it in a way that for a human or for a lost reads like the violation of an oath. But their perspective on what must happen in relation to what they have actually said can be inscrutable.
I found that confusing. I wasn't sure how to turn that into something practical.
I think you just, as a storyteller, have to like really lay out the rules that a true Fae operates under, and it may be different from true Fae to true Fae. So like when you're designing this antagonist, in addition to stats, powers, appearance, whatever, they need a coherent logic system of their own, or at least partially of their own. I mean, that's my sense anyway.
Okay, go on.
So next up is manifestations. There's a nice note that the Fae are limitless beings, but that they must restrict their powers to meaningfully interact with others. The form into which they manifest represents one of their titles, among many. These manifestations will always have some kind of tell that indicates there is a capital F Fae behind the form. This can include an actor, which is a living avatar, prop, which is an object, realm, which is a place, or a wisp, which is either a group of creatures or autonomic functions, whichever that might mean.
I had a hard time conceptualizing wisps.
I just thought, I mean, Chimera, I think, is probably the easiest entry point, or anything that doesn't fit into the other three that you think of.
Okay.
The Being's Borders section points out that within the boundaries of a fairy's being, nothing can truly destroy or constrain anything else. However, they can for sure alter and destroy each other. Those are the feuds that they live by. And indeed, they can die. They can die through being devoured by having each other's titles absorbed through their conflicts, kind of reminiscent of shaping combat in Exalted Fairfolk, and we'll get into that more later on. Dwindling, without conflict to give them purpose, they starve and their titles erode and their manifestations diminish until they collapse or become detached to float through Arcadia as free entities. It's rare for a Fae to die by dwindling alone, though, because they can always take up the hunt to reassert themselves or escape to Earth and rebuild their power. There is a reframing of the forgetful ones on Earth as actor manifestations that have kind of peeled away.
Oh, I have thoughts on that. As part of that reframing, they emphasize that they can go so far that they gain clarity, which is a direct contradiction from earlier books, and one that I personally really like. I prefer this take.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of retcons the metaphysics in a way that makes more sense. So I'm into that. And then rarest is obliteration, which is always dramatic. It can happen through violating an oath sworn on their own name breaking, they call it. It can happen through mortal doom if their essence is entirely embodied outside of Arcadia. Or, rarest of all, they can have a nemesis who shares their name but is their perfect opposite. Almost like fetches for the true Fae, which I thought was kind of cool.
How surreal.
Yeah. The last bit of this is the capital F feud. So the feud is an agreement to undergo conflict as the foundation of their society. They kind of, as a group, give each other permission to create capital L legends in order to contest their titles, often along thematic lines. The mutual oath that a group of Fae swears forms a feudal court. This is a little bit more abstract than the Great Courts of the Lost, but they do have like neutral ground realms that get created where they can meet, discuss, and perhaps engage in the minigame that we'll see in the appendix. So all of that. Thoughts on the nature of the Fae?
Whew. Where was all of this in the core book?
Right?
Uh,
Or at least in Autumn Nightmares, where they tried to like say, here's the real deal.
Autumn Nightmares and Rites of Spring. So I gotta do the rundown. So the core book starts off by saying, look, nobody really understands anything about anything when it comes to anything about the Fae, especially when it comes to the true Fae. Interesting. Then Autumn Nightmare says, here's a bunch of ideas on what they could be. And it's like, yeah, we got some cool thoughts out of that, but honestly, a lot of it didn't really seem that interesting. Then Rites of Spring, I think it was, came out and said, here's some more thoughts, where they doubled down upon the idea of maybe they just want to study humans or they need human infants for something.
Ew.
And it was something I could do more with, but it was still kind of eh. And then this book comes out, which just outright says, here's how the Fae work. Changes practically everything I know about them, makes me absolutely love the Fae as a concept and totally grok how to play them, and wish that this was the presentation we had from the beginning. We did not need what we got in Autumn Nightmares and in Rites of Spring. This is what we should have had the whole time.
Do you maybe think that this was kind of an outgrowth of both people were frustrated enough by this point that they were like, just tell us, and then also they realized they would need something more concrete if they were going to continue the line?
Yes, I think so, because the core book does so much to make everything mysterious
Mhm.
that it's practically unusable as a point to expand upon if you want to say something meaningful about the things. And I feel like the guidance they've been giving us for the True Fate up to this point was not substantial enough. So I like to think that
Yeah.
there was some fan demand already for something more robust about the true Fae. I appreciate the idea that the true Fae should be unknowable, but I think that this does something better. It makes them alien in a way that I can sympathize with. They're still terrible, but I understand why they do feuds with each other, why they go after mortals, why they have these conflicts. They want to exist, and this is how they exist. They cannot operate without it. That doesn't mean they're not monsters, but it's something intelligible, and I think that's more interesting than just red tooth, he rhymes, and he's a big ogre.
That guy.
The second thing is, I think what could have been interesting is if the core book had started off by saying, hey, we'll talk about what the true Fae are in greater detail later in the line, but for right now, here's some popular theories about what they are, and something that would just get you started for an interaction with them. We do get the huntsman, but I don't think they did the best job of presenting that in that book.
Well, and also to a point that I've made before, Lost is much more than I expected, trying to point its players towards the Hedge and Arcadia, and I think that's maybe something which just intensified over time, again, from player feedback. So it's like, the core book is very vague in terms of details about them, because I think it wants you to be really grounded on Earth. And then as they realized, well, maybe this isn't working. Note that all of the Miami stuff has basically fallen away. Like, we get one page of story in here that's Miami related. And instead, it's like pushing more and more towards chronicles that will delve into this stuff. So yeah.
This is ironic because
Yeah.
the core book emphasizes that, hey, the changelings want as little to do with the hedge as possible
Exactly.
because it's so dangerous. Yet they must go there because where else could they possibly get glamour? It already didn't make sense in the core book. But you are right. There's a lot here about why you would want to go into the hedge. And you know what, Puka? Maybe part of it was that desire to, now that we've established the tragedy of the setting, let's show off more of the
The
cool
comedy?
fairy tale aspects of the game.
Okay. To your point about sympathizing and making them relatable, though, the next part does kind of give you a tool to do that with the manifestations. So each manifestation coalesces around a specific title. Its fate is the title's fate. Each manifestation is subject to rules and conditions and a predetermined length of existence. Most gentry can only bend and not break these rules. There's a bit that's like, no cold iron, no creating it ever. So I guess that's one. Ironclad rule, if you will. The types that we get, again, actors are corporeal, with corporeality itself being a restraint because the Fae agrees to play by at least some of the rules of life, like solidity or mortality. Their contract with the weird lets them negotiate the details on the fly. Still hella powerful, stat-wise. We get creation rules that are kind of like swole versions of changelings. And they create these in order to have mortal experiences that they can play out their own legends with. But as we saw in Autumn Nightmares, some get too attached to that and get banished.
There's a beautiful note here about how a Fae could isolate themselves and create little conflicts, or they could make a 1,000 armed, 100-meter tall giant that's immune to all physical harm and instantly wins, but that it would be masturbatory for them to do so. There's no benefit for them to do it because of the need for conflict.
I'm going to just let the pun around 100 arms and the word masturbatory sit where it is and move on. So then props, they can also take the form of inanimate objects, as ordinary or as weird as the keeper wants, with conditions of use that they set. So they can be like, this is a sword that cuts butter, and it does it exceptionally well, and it doesn't cut anything else. Each item has 1 power plus 1 for every title the creator has, with narrow parameters where it functions perfectly. This is represented by like lots of bonus dice. There is also always a weakness that the Fae does not choose. Otherwise, it's generally indestructible.
I love the props because the idea that they're absolutely perfect at doing whatever one thing they do is a really neat and shocking idea we haven't seen yet.
So then realms are places, which are mutable but defined by rules. Each must have a gateway. Each must be hospitable, in heavy quotes, in that a visitor must be able to survive in at least some part of the realm, although certainly there can still be dangers. And there must be patterns kind of at play that structure the realm. These realms exist in order to be experienced by others, to support a keeper's retinue, and to provide a venue for their legends. The keeper can sense anything that happens within, but they rarely pay that much attention. Inhabitants can include free-willed independent beings, extensions of the keeper like plants or animals or furniture, and of course, changeling slaves.
I love the note that there has to be a way in and out of the place because again they have to play by fair rules.
Yeah. Lastly are wisps, basically a group of chimera with a common tell, as far as I can understand here. They again use changeling traits as a basis, including contracts, or, as a sidebar points out, other splat powers from the other games if you so choose, but they don't have to be humanoid, importantly. They share a common mind with the Keeper, but they lose that connection if they leave Arcadia. The Keeper can also sever that intentionally to make free-roaming monsters. And that kind of reminds me of, apologies for bringing up Sandman, but in Sandman, the Corinthian is like a nightmare that was let loose into the world and became a free-willed entity. So that kind of...
Yeah, that example makes sense.
So that's how they can manifest. Within Arcadia itself, though, we get the laws of Arcadia that must be attended to. Really, though, these are more like tropes and motifs and story beats, not laws. Just my minor quibble there. So this begins with the journey to Arcadia, which is relevant for the endgame chronicle they're trying to point to here. The journey can have a guide, which is both the most reliable and most dangerous way to get back to Arcadia, because usually it's one of the gentry. You can try to extract a promise for safe guidance or passage. Tough to do, but they like to negotiate. in extremis just say, oh, I have the Faerie favor merit. A non-exiled Fae may instead grant a travel token. This is a token that lets you directly transport between the mortal world and a stated point in Arcadia without bothering with the hedge in between. It can only be used once, and it is not without risk, because you have to roll, resolve plus weird, and spend 3 glamour, and a dramatic failure will be not good for you. There's also a bit about deals, pawns, and cat's paws. This covers alliances between the changelings and the Fae. With exiles, they mainly form these to get information about Arcadia so that they can go mess up other gentry. With the gentry who are still landed, to use the term here, they will make exchanges, usually, again, for safe passage in exchange for acquiring some object is the most common. But really, this is like your opportunity as a storyteller to build in any kind of story hook you want, any kind of this for that deal. Just remember that those deals are always perilous for the changelings, and there will always be complications.
I loved getting a little more information on the wide road and the narrow roads, along with just information about what does it look like when you're getting to Arcadia? How does that work? There's so many different ways you could get there.
Yeah, none of them great.
Yeah, they're all pretty bad choices, but honestly, that's part of what makes this kind of chronicle interesting.
Yep. So yeah, the wide road is like the big boulevards that the gentry walk on, which is easy, but you're going to run into the gentry. Or the narrow road, which is crawling through the hedge, which will attract less notice, but again can be fraught with peril, as your changeling would know from having escaped through it at least once. If you do manage to end up in Arcadia, here's where we get specifics about the mechanics and various other setting details. So first with clarity, you roll 2 dice when you enter and every weird days afterward in order to avoid losing clarity, but you get a bonus from mortal pledges because they ground you to the real world, and you regain clarity when you come back from Arcadia. There is also this sidebar. You can bring iron with you through the hedge to Arcadia, but it's really tough and the gentry will not be happy, so most don't try doing it. Once you enter a domain other than that of where you spent your durance or something similar to where you spent it, you have to make pledges to the realm, not to the gentry who rules it, importantly, so that you can interact with things like gravity or food. You have to give up a token of 3 dots or more, a dot of willpower, or perform a menial service. You can also borrow the connection that another lost might have with a realm. And I like the note that most lost who aren't coming with you to the realm of their durance are only too happy to let you borrow their affinity for it. They're like, yes, take my keeper, please.
I have a question about this that I forgot to go back and look up. When it says the realm, is that just if it's a Fae manifesting as a realm, or does that also include the landscapes that Fae just sometimes happen to occupy?
I think it's the latter because they don't have to be currently manifesting as a realm. The domain may be coterminous with the keeper itself if they are currently in the mood to be a place, but not necessarily.
That makes sense.
So then the watchword for Arcadia that we get here is familiarity, or perhaps familiarity, where the Fey part of a changeling feels at home here among all of the vibrant landscapes and whatnot. Plus they get a point of glamour. And it unsettles them because they understand what it represents and it still feels like home to be there. At the same time, it is important to avoid the notice of the gentry because they will just keep you there probably. If you move through the landscape humbly, you probably won't catch their attention. But given that most changelings are going to Arcadia in order to do something that will catch their attention, not great.
I trying to imagine making just an endless series of complications of gentry showing up and saying, "Hey, what are you doing carrying all that iron there? What's bringing you down the wide road? What's going on?" Just like an endless series of them.
I'll give you free passage if you go kill my foe first. So other inhabitants you might run into besides the gentry include hobgoblins or local changelings, who can be either helpful or hazardous. And there is this really sort of like sidebar about paying for freedom, where like desperate changelings will free their loved ones by trading primarily either infants or other changelings. And this kind of points back to a prologue story you might have seen earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So then the overall structure of Arcadia, more metaphysically, we get notes about how it is governed by the laws of dream and story. It has ephemeral features, so this can include furniture, flora, fauna, generally illusory creations by the ruling gentry that show no actual creativity. These begin to fade away quickly once they enter the hedge, until they are non-existent when you enter the real world. There is an important remark that if the ruler of a domain does direct their attention towards a group of changelings, they can alter these features at will to be suddenly deadly or confining. So take note. Opposed to that are the real portions, changelings and hobgoblins, certain objects or natural features. I was kind of not sure what they meant about like real as opposed to ephemeral in the context of a dream space. But the way they're defining it here seems to be that it's stuff that's unique or is perceived to be unique. That's what makes it real. And I like that as a tie-in to all of the stuff we got before about how the Fae delineate themselves in order to exist. It's like existence is a matter of perception here and will. And that tracks. That works for me.
I thought it was peculiar as well. It gives me the impression that some of these things don't really count as fae, hobgoblins, or any other
Yeah.
neat category. They're just there. So if it's a cat, just deal with the fact that it's a cat and don't worry about it too much. It's another mystery, even here at the end.
They can resemble those things, but the lines are not as simple as here's what you sense. High clarity will help you distinguish.
The important part is that you can negotiate with them, and in fact, you sometimes must, which is a great bit for storytelling. Like the river that says, I didn't say you could cross me, and then
Right.
turns itself into like 10 miles wide.
Of course, time is very variable here. Storytellers do what you want, is the advice. They're like, we're not going to give you a system, just roll with it.
Though they do specify you can't go backwards in time. Huh.
Yeah, which I'm fine with that note, because that just plays merry hell with story structure.
Who cares at this point?
I know. So how does one change in Arcadia, and what if one is rescued? Well, it is primarily a two-step process. The first thing that happens is that mortals adapt to Arcadia after being there for a few days. If they consume the food or drink, they become enchanted or permanently ensorcelled. After a week or so, they'll probably start agreeing to pledges, which results in a Fae-touched mortal. And then eventually, they are fully a changeling. Beyond that, they might become a hobgoblin or even a full capital F Fae. Each stage has different benefits and different levels of memory that remain if they are rescued back to Earth before they fully become part of the landscape, really. So those are sort of the psychological transformations or metaphysical ones. Physical ones can also happen due to spending time in a certain environment or at the whim of the keeper, whether those are minor things or things big enough to gain a seeming, and if you're a changeling, even a kith. So in order to kind of represent these mechanically, we get some partial transformation merits. There's Fae touched, which is really more of a lesser supernatural template rather than a merit. The enchanted mortal merit for mortals, the no seeming merit for changelings, and the seeming merit for Fae touched mortals, so they can actually gain a seeming. And these are thinly described, and I'm annoyed because this is an entire game right here. Like,
How do you mean?
well, like I could happily run a Fae touched game instead of a changeling game,
Oh, yes, I see what you mean.
and I would like that to be expanded. I think it is expanded upon in I can't remember which book. Whichever book has the cambions in it, I think it's expanded more. So maybe we'll get to that at some point. But that, in a way, that I think is something I'm more interested in running than a standard game.
The Fae Touch do show up again as a core concept in 2nd edition, though how they get there works a little differently.
Yeah. So then finally leaving Arcadia. Much tougher. You have to find a path, roll your clarity, and good luck. There's a bit on freeing captives here, which notes that some changelings can't be freed if they no longer have memories of the mortal world. Some are also just not human enough anymore and will be rejected wholesale if they try to go back. And that would be some rough role-playing if you worked that into a story, but I'm into it.
I also found it confusing because they do say something about that in the core book, and they say, hey, it's going to be a big issue for elementals.
Yeah.
But then in the Winter Masks book, they really get into how inhuman you can become and still bring your way back. So I wish they'd done a better job of delineating what counts as being too inhuman to go back.
They do specify if you've been there for more than a human lifetime, and I think that's a reasonable threshold to include.
In this book?
Yeah, it's on page 107. But, I mean, yeah, absolutely agreed. So after all of that, because sweet gentry, this chapter is large. we get the shifting land. This is descriptions of 4 buckets of domains that have specific examples, some laws of the land that apply, and effects to deal with, though naturally these can and do all change. There's no deep details on keepers here because they want to allow storytellers to focus on using the setting for itself and allow for weird mashups between a domain and its ruler that are unexpected. But each of the detailed realms does point to seemings and kiths that might commonly arise from it. So I've got one-liners. Anything before I start flying through these?
Just that I'm reminded of the realms we got in a previous book, and I think this is better than all the stuff that we got there. And if we didn't have 4 chapters and an appendix, I could spend our entire runtime just talking about these.
Yeah, this could have been a book in and of itself. And I think it was Winter Masks that had the previous descriptions along these lines. But yeah, I agree that this is definitely more thorough. All right, I'm going to try to set a speed record for this. The first bucket are noble manners, which are inspired by human noble estates from around the world, such as, first, the Hall of Seasons, a cruciform British-style manor where each wing is a season, and they're only occupied one at a time. The Manse of Forgotten Time, within whose piecemeal architecture time doesn't pass. The Estate, a mishmash of buildings, grounds, and traditions from many places around the world. And the House of Infinity, a simple castle that has a huge labyrinthine interior that defies logic. Laws of the noble manners include noblesse oblige, which are the responsibilities of nobility and oaths of fealty that can be sworn here, and privilege and prerogative. Things like modern technology and destructive magic just don't work, but servants get a major socialized bump, and magic that supports the gentry gets a bonus. Rather than standing armies, the rulers rely on inanime. This is not dreaming inanime, this is just like statuary that can be animated and come to the gentry's defense. It's cool, but not as cool as Nature Fae.
I loved it. The liminal space of the House of Infinity was particularly touching for me.
Yeah, it reminded me of Pir and Daisy, the novel by Susanna Clarke, which I dig. Read it, it's great. Next up is the pitiless elements, which are realms that are essentially crystallizations of elemental power, like the Icy Vastness, a large frozen domain that's centered on an ice fortress, and life there is just a dreary struggle for survival. The Deep, an ocean of warm, thick water filled with weird predators and colorful treasures. Burning Sands, a desert scorched by twin suns, inhabited by nomads and great drakes that serve as steeds for the gentry. And the Empty Wastes, badlands of multicolored wind-shaped stone that are filled with eerie voices. Laws of the land include elemental prejudice, where each realm has a favored and opposed element, and associated magic and contracts get a bonus or penalty relevant to that. And then seeming harmony, which is the same principle but based on seeming and kith and how they align or disalign with the realm. True Fae who rule these domains can channel the soul of the land into elemental attacks, kind of similar to the elemental blessing.
Yes, I thought it was basically the same thing.
Yeah, I liked the Empty Wastes the best. There's some cool... Like, I mean, desert, ocean, icy landscape, I can understand how all those work, but having this, like, weird sculpted stone forest like southern Utah where there's maybe ghosts, it's like, yeah, edge ghosts.
And it really sounds beautiful. The part about the rocks all seeming as soft as clay was a tactile thought.
Next is the Untamed Wilds, which are the vast forests where the wild hunt roams, through domains such as the Verdant Dream, a truly fairy tale forest in terms of how it looks and in terms of how everyone has a storybook role there to play. The Wild Lodge, a castle among giant sequoias from which the wild hunt issues, another struggle for survival kind of realm. I guess they're all kind of struggles for survival, but especially that one.
I thought it was a little weird that this was separated from the pitiless elements because I wasn't totally sure what the difference was.
I guess because they're considering a forest as being not elemental and more like a mix of stuff, but yeah. There's also the Twilight Wood, which is a gross marshland filled with semi-sentient mobile trees and many fey insects. And I'm thinking, like, what if those super overpowered glamour mites are here? That would be...
Oh no.
You know.
oh no. No.
Clouds of them.
Oh god.
And then the Savage Jungle, which is defined by predator and prey relationships. Local losts cooperate to survive in their heavily fortified villages for as long as they can. Laws of the land include dead wood. A changeling who dies here becomes a tree, whence the unusual sentience of the trees here. and fear of falling, which I really liked. If you fall out of a tree and believe you'll land safely, you will. It's kind of a handy trick.
It felt like something from a dreaming realm.
Or just dreams. Like, that's a lucid
Yeah,
dreaming concept. So,
good point.
the true Fae who rule here can make use of twisting paths, altering those paths as they wish in order to reward or punish, although you can reflexively roll wits plus weird to notice when that's happening. Lastly, the dread purpose domains are those created for a specific intent or design, such as the Fell Mines, situated in the titanic corpse of a true Fae, from which the magical crimson steel is mined. The Grinding Gears, a huge hazardous factory that processes the mine's materials into goods, and the Carnival of 1,000 Delights, called the Granddaddy of all goblin markets, but also with Midnight Circus vibes in the mix. Obviously, that was my favorite. Laws of the land for these include From the Ashes, a deal made by the true Fae with the Phoenix means that any Fae killed or maimed on the job will resurrect or be healed, and a Cog in the Machine. Teamwork makes the work go more smoothly, so those rolls get bonuses. Rulers make use of Where there's a whip, there's a way, using threat and weird to boost workers' energy beyond their endurance, or else to induce fatigue in interlopers. And that's it. Lord.
You did it.
I
You
did it.
did it. You really did it. My favorite out of all of these, there's so many good ones, but I have to give a special note to the Verdant Dream
Yeah.
because of them making it very specifically, it's little pixies and prancing unicorns. And guess what? You get the unfortunate role of being in a fairy tale. It's actually pretty similar to the world that I used when I ran my chronicle. So it has a special place in my heart, in addition to being twee in a subversive way.
And it is another thing, like, you could have an entire game, like, series of games that's just that. Because when you say, oh, it's a fairy tale forest, there's so much variety in the stories that have been told about and set in fairy tale forests. Like, yes, everyone has to have a specific role. There are hundreds to pick from. So,
Well, I was reading about places like the Fell Mines and the Grinding Gears. I was thinking, I could just set a campaign here.
mhm. Yeah, like, it's detailed. It is so little detail compared with the potential. And I mean, I don't expect them to, write entire chapters about each of these, but they could have. Coming to the end of this 50-page chapter, I do have the feeling that we saw a lot of this before, but as you said, it's kind of better detailed and more coherent here. I might be conflating some Dark Ages Fae and Exalted stuff into the mix, like thinking of the Dark Ages Fae realm descriptions from that book. It gives a lot of rationale for why the Fae behave the way that they do. And while I'm glad that we got details about the domains, one thing that I would have liked to just like take it up a notch are story hooks or rumors to help get a chronicle there. Because these are very richly described. The sort of impetus to get from Earth into them, I wouldn't have minded some more guidance around that.
They talk about it some here and in chapter 4, but the biggest idea is that you're supposedly guided there by wanting to get somebody or something out.
Mhm.
I think that makes sense, but I also feel like they left some money on the table.
Yeah.
Like, to me, the biggest thing you could do is this. We didn't really talk about this yet, but the idea of the Fae need conflict, and that can happen in The Hunt, where they come to the mortal world and have conflict, but it can also be the feuds they have, where they ante up their titles against each other and play out their stories. And I think you could have a wonderful story where a Fae says, hey, I tell you what, I'm not going to kill you, or I will actually grant you the benefit you want, but you gotta help me get this rose planted in my rival's realm. I think that's good enough. I think having the true Fae send you on Shadowrun-like missions is a shockingly good source of entertainment for this.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Is this also the one where we talked about... Wait, is Mercy in this chapter? Oh god, yeah, we didn't bring this up. The Immortal Mercy was something I wanted to talk about.
Oh yeah, that was buried somewhere in the somewhere back there.
So,
Save your own skin.
first off, I love the idea that we have the true Fae is the concept of this name, and it only manifests through these titles, and having more titles is both a status symbol and a way of self-preservation and expression. Very cool. And I love the fact that when they divide them into the 4 different categories, that makes them easier to understand. And then I love even more so the fact that the actors can wander off, and when they come into the mortal world, they become temporarily divorced from the connection in Faerie. So it doesn't know what's going on in Faerie, and its true Fae name doesn't know what's going on with its actor title, which I have to imagine is already unsettling. But the fact is that that actor is kind of an independent being. If you kill it, you kill the title that is tied up in that actor. And because of that, if you corner them, you can force it to swear immortal mercy, which is where you promise that you will never hurt it, but in exchange, you get one thing you want, no matter what that is, and they can grant you almost anything. So cool.
Yeah. And it makes for a good hook for like getting people involved in dealing with the Fae in the first place. If you encounter this being on Earth and then such a thing happens, they're surprisingly powerful. You still manage to get them into a corner. This is their offer to keep themselves alive, or entitled, I guess.
The other thing I liked about this chapter is that it made me feel better about the idea of the power scale of the actors, since a lot of these antagonists tend to not be that much stronger than a changeling character might be. But the idea that the Fae have to play fair in order to get something out of existence finally made that click for me.
Yeah, it's another retcon to make things make sense. And it works. Yeah.
It's a good one, folks. You can skip what the core book, Autumn Nightmares, and Rites of Spring say about the Fae and just skip right over to this one. Take all of that as useful superstitions that changelings might have about the Fae and sprinkle it in while keeping this in mind, because this is, I think, the best way of handling them.
Alternatively, storytellers, just keep this chapter for yourself. So then,
speaking of storytellers, would you like to hear about the hardest road?
I would like to first point out how Nama is striking a pose here on page 100 and whatever it is, 26.
Let me take a look at that pose here.
But yeah, this is the only Miami bit that we get as the opening story for chapter 4. It's fine. She's going to send them on a quest. Chapter 4 is the hardest road. So, Fetch, why is it the hardest road?
Well, it's the hardest road because now we have to actually tell a story about going into Faerie.
Ugh.
And that's an overwhelming thought, isn't it? To actually take your players there?
It almost feels like we might need some kind of skeletal story structure. Almost.
Oh my goodness. What do we have here? But exactly that. This is going to be split into two parts. First, we get some more general storytelling advice and optional rules that maybe could have been back in chapter 2, but here's 4 things I liked about them.
Yay.
1. The book suggests describing things in Faerie with the nuance that fate has a hand in them. And make it subtle. I love that as a tweak that might go under the player's noses, but subconsciously tickle their brains, or might be something they pick up on based upon how good you as a storyteller are at changing up the way you describe things. It's an advanced storyteller technique that they're proposing, and I love that kind of thing.
I like it a lot more than pointing to Exalted and Scion for inspiration. So, yeah.
See, I actually thought that was funny that they are like, hey, look, you might as well go to these books when you're getting this powerful. It's,
I guess.
okay, it's questionable because those are very different books and systems, and let's be honest, your weird 10 changeling isn't doing what an Essence 5 Solar is.
Well, the Fairfolk book would work great, and they don't reference it. Like, they point to Sidarial's, also fine, but, you know.
It would have been helpful if they were a little bit more specific in which books or what material to put out of it, perhaps.
I guess also they're pointing to heroics here, so that works. Anyway, okay.
Speaking of heroics, other games have things like hero points. This one introduces fate points. It's an optional system that lets you tweak actions to help avoid harm or guarantee success. Just a neat thing you might want to add into your game. And finally, they say the quest to Arcadia is usually to retrieve something, which I've already said before is, but it's followed up by a note that I love, which is, make it personal. Even if a kingdom is at stake, make it personal. And that is some advice that resonates with me as a storyteller. It's difficult for me to get concerned about, going back to a dreaming example, what's going to happen to the entire freehold of Phoenix, Arizona if the Baron gets his way and eternal winter is declared. It's too big, it's too broad. But I do care when the question is what's going to happen between you and your father, who is the Baron? What's it going to mean between you and your motley mate that you're in love with if the two of you are divided by this declaration? Make it the same here. If people are going to Faerie, give them some personal reason to do it. It could be as simple as what they suggest, retrieving something, but there's other options. You could make it about you all have the same keeper and it's time to make that bastard pay. It's good stuff. But you brought up the skeleton.
I did.
The skeleton is a lot of pages. And I am not going to describe all of them because we would be here again the whole night. Generally speaking, it's just expanding upon previous material already introduced in this book about how to run stories in Arcadia. It's just expanding upon every step of the journey. Rather than lay out everything for you and possibly spoil some everything, I'm just going to hit upon 7 highlights. First off, we get a lovely description of how you can let players bring a little army in there. Because if you've got a bunch of characters that are weird 6 plus and they're playing the monarchs of the courts, it wouldn't be weird if they could get 30 to 50 people to come along with them. But then they go on to say, here's how you still make that a horror situation. Whittle down all the people that they've brought with them. They get a little mean by saying, make sure you give all of them names and personalities. I feel like at this point, if they're coming with you into Faerie, they're probably people that you already have that kind of relationship with. But the point is, you whittle them down, having them either fall to the threats of the thorns or turning back. And every time that happens, you make a strike on the player character's clarity. I thought that was a really nice touch for handling such a big group going into Faerie. Second, they don't say this before, but the entrance to Arcadia is always guarded by a sentry, which is normally going to manifest as some kind of big, tough person, and tends to also be something that is beyond the weird's classification, though they suggest that it may be a release wisp. I gotta say, Pooka, the wisps are doing a lot of heavy lifting in this book for I don't know what this is.
In the same way that in Dreaming, you can have Chimera for any purpose that needs filling. Like, if an actor manifestation as a person won't do it, if a prop manifestation as a MacGuffin won't do it, if a realm manifestation as a setting won't do it, that's what you're left with. A sentient event would be interesting.
Ooh. Ooh, God. Okay. Notes for later. You're inspiring me, Pooka.
Huzzah!
Point number 3. I feel like you could repurpose everything in here for going into the deep dreaming. But, Pooka, I haven't actually read Into Dreams and Nightmares, is what the book's called, right?
Just dreams and nightmares.
Okay. How much would you agree with the sentiment that you could take the skeleton structure of fairies going from the mortal world into the land of Faerie on a quest and coming back, and compare that to a journey from the autumn world into the deep dreaming?
I mean, I've got to turn that into a broader comment, which is that as much as this skeleton that they're presenting tries to pitch itself as different from something like the hero's journey, which I'm grateful for, it is still, in my opinion, too confining of a skeleton, and I think I would feel that way in either game. It is a good starting point, but I would encourage storytellers to think about the themes of the particular game that they're running and how to adjust the steps laid out here in a way that makes sense. Or just the type of story you want to tell, because like not every journey there and back story is going to necessitate the same steps. So it can work for sure. It doesn't have to be the same.
Going on to the next point. Point number 4. The first Arcadian realm somebody finds is usually common grounds for a feud or an abandoned realm. Abandoned realms are eerie and sometimes claimed by changelings who go mad there. Feudal realms all have a common theme between the ones that they haven't, between the different fairy lords. I just love this idea of a changeling arriving in one of these abandoned realms where things shift to accommodate them, and they give up their quest right at the 99% mark because they find a throne upon which they can sit.
As you do.
Next up, realms have gatekeepers. And again, I'm not sure whether this is talking about the proper realm manifestation or just the worlds that you're living in. This one seems to actually be the former because I think they capitalize realm in this case, but I'm not sure.
I didn't catch that in my notes, but you might be right. It was very late when I read this part.
Yeah, so this has to be. So I think the idea here is that if you go to a fairy that is manifesting as a realm, then you're going to encounter a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And the gatekeeper is usually going to be some really powerful, dangerous changeling who's all in on serving the Fae. They have Ognanov, who is a pretty scary customer physically, but also an interesting example of how a changeling can be enslaved by the Fae and still be a threat to people who have achieved their freedom, because he's been doing this for a while. The Minotaur, by contrast, is a terrifying example of what a person can become by the sheer negligence of the Fae, as the book calls it, an example of those left behind. Just, ugh, spooky image to think about.
I feel bad for him. But yeah.
I do. And that's the point, right? Is that he used to be somebody. If you look at his stats, there's hints that he may have been like a butler or something at some point, that he
Yeah.
had social etiquette, and it's just it doesn't matter anymore. Now he's just the Minotaur. And my final point is that when they talk about escaping from Faerie, they say go all out, have all the Fae chase them down, and then they give you an example of the Baroness, which is a weird 10 true Fae actor who sounds terrifying, has a picture to match, and oh my god, those stats. Those are some of the most terrifying stats I have seen in the game for any character.
Don't mess with the Baroness.
So, overall, I thought that Chapter 4 was a good read if you want a deeper dive into how to do something with Fairy and just some more storytelling options. If none of that strikes you, you might get a lot of use out of these stat blocks because we do get a lot of new entities written up in this section, which you could easily repurpose for other things. I don't think I needed the skeleton, but hey, if you're going to put something like in here anyway, why not make it the last book from the main area? How about you? Any other thoughts on the last chapter before we go on to the appendix?
Yeah, I mean, like chapter 2, I felt like it was kind of generic advice for any chronicle with a dangerous get in, get out structure, mixed with the advice we've seen extensively for fleshing out the hedge. Maybe a little bit more intense with the addition of like the Gentry and the Arcadia proper. It's maybe a little bit more elegant than the hero's journey, but that's because it's very purpose driven. There's not really a lot here about character development except as a side effect of the quest. And maybe that's okay if this is supposed to be an end game. You don't need to develop characters much further if you're wrapping them up. I think sometimes they used more words than were necessary for what they were trying to get across. Many of them words that have already been said in some fashion in other storyteller advice, but it was fine.
Well, then, at last we have the appendix.
So as this book is already quite large, we will do a mini-sode later that gives all of the details necessary to actually run this game because we think it would be cool for you to do so. But for now, just as an overview, this is the Game of Immortals, a mini role-playing game tacked on here to represent what the capital F Fae play with each other to create their big L legends. It is really fun, I have to agree.
It looks so cool.
It does.
It has a great picture to accompany it.
Oh,
One of
yeah.
the best art
Yeah.
pieces in the book.
This would be good for like a one-shot at a convention or something to get people into the setting,
Yeah.
maybe. So essentially, I mean, very briefly, you choose the name of your Fae and how many titles you'll get You can either do that fairly and evenly distributed or just roll. The titles are assigned counterclockwise around the table by other players. So you determine how many you'll get, and then the people go around the table telling you what your titles are. Each one gives that person who gives you a title a feud promise, which is the right to legend a duel for a title and thereby take it. This is their terminology. I'm not making this up. Because the object of the game is to devour a rival's title and eventually their name by telling stories, which are the legends. So you do that, this is the challenge portion, by starting, this is the legend of Challenger's title and the challenged phase title. And then the challenged Fae responds with an outline of the legend. So the story of how they ... You select your manifestations for the duel, and the style of the legend is determined by dice. It can be either glorious or spiteful or unbound. And those are kind of straightforward and tragic or cynical and weird, respectively. So the manifestations, each one, this is the same as we saw before, actor, prop, realm, and wisp, and they kind of guide the storytelling. Actor requires it to be in the first person. Prop is from the perspective of the object, so kind of third person limited. Realm is told in the present tense, but doesn't get into the psychology of the characters. And Wisp requires a conflict within the ranks of the Fae fighting the duel that has to be resolved along the way. So I kind of liked that. And then the actual storytelling, the title here is The Cauldron of Legends. And there's a 3-step process. The challenger begins the legend, the challenged player narrates an obstacle, and the challenger finishes the story. Something that I wasn't clear on here was whether this is supposed to be iterative, kind of like the riddle game concept, the game of reality. But it also kind of just seems like one and done, and then a session of this game would be like going around the table, everybody doing these relatively short stories until titles are all whittled away.
Yeah, I think the idea is that you're supposed to do the story and then see if somebody flubs in one of the many ways that can get them out of the story. But if you're the one making the challenge and you get to the end of your story successfully without hitting any of those landmines, then your character does successfully acquire the title, and then play just passes on to the right.
Yep. And if you do flub, there are consequences. So if you break the guidelines established by your manifestation, that is oath-breaking, and the first one to do it loses the challenge. People may have to vote on whether a violation has actually taken place. It is also acceptable to surrender, but what must be avoided at all costs is the dread gap. This is when you're lost for words, and in the context of the game, that represents entire story worlds grinding to a halt. So in those moments, a player who's not involved in the duel can invade the story and take over. Not great for you.
If you do this, please be aware of player comfort, because sometimes people do just have trouble speaking up or getting their words out. Don't be a jerk.
I'm noticing that they don't mention that that's a thing that can happen at all, which is a major oversight, but it was many years ago before safety tools. If you have no titles left, there's always your name to gamble, and eventually you either get your name eaten, you dwindle out of existence, you leave Arcadia to save yourself from destruction, or, if you should win, you transcend into something. Once you get to 6 titles, that's what happens. So I love it. Deep vibes of shaping combat from Fairfolk, vibes of inscrutable divine combat. What's not to love? The question I'm left with is okay, so this is what the keepers are actually playing amongst themselves, but are they actually gathering in their neutral realm and narrating to each other? Or is it that their vast moves and counter moves with how they handle their realm constitute acts within the story? Are they literally living, in whatever sense they live, the moves in this game? Or do they get together and actually gamble their titles in what passes for real time? Or possibly both?
I think that it's both. I think that on one level, they communicate in some way that is obfuscated to us because our existences and minds are not the same as the true Fae. And those are the things that are then setting up these duels, which they then create as the manifestations, and then those manifestations play out either in the feud realms or in each other's domains.
That makes sense, yeah. Simultaneity.
One thing I think is missing, I would have loved a big section about them doing this in the mortal world, because that just sounds hilarious to me.
Yeah. Well, that's Exalted the Fairfolk, right? So the book overall, It's good, although I don't know that I would call it my favorite in the same way. I'm hard pressed to pick a favorite, but I think that it is mushier than the others in terms of there's not much crunch to grab onto compared with some of the others and not as many concrete examples. I'm actually fine with that. I like having models for extensive setting description and storyteller guidance. What I take issue with is kind of a broader issue that I have with the game where it's very fever dreamy and it assumes that your end game scenario will always lead you into Arcadia. As a side point to that, if you are going to do a journey into Arcadia, you don't need crossover material. That's my opinion.
I don't think it's saying that the journey always takes you into Arcadia. I think what they're saying is if we're going to be talking about end game, then this is going to be the place that we talk about Arcadia, so we might as well give a lot of focus upon that. It's just unfortunate that a lot of the energy that they say applies to these stories is really stuff that could have been in an earlier book and sometimes was.
And I think that they could have called that out as applicable to other kinds of endings to represent other ways of slipping away from the mortal world as changelings do. Like,
Mm.
what about something along the lines of Shiokain and Dreaming from before C20, where they reconcile their Fey and mortal sides perfectly, but stay on Earth? What does that look like? Lost points more towards the C20 version, where you acquire a mantle, and that looks a lot like acquiring an Eldritch Order title or becoming a keeper, although becoming a keeper is more fraught. Or what about just, what if you want to wrap up a chronicle and have an endgame, but your players are weird 3 and 4? Like, just ending a story at low power. I think the book is good at what it sets out to do. I'm just not sure it's the only way I can foresee Chronicles coming to a close, or even that it's the default option I would choose. It is what they have chosen for this game, and I accept that. It's just, I would not have minded seeing other directions explored. Definitely down to play the game of the appendix, though.
You do make a good point. I would have loved to have seen more information about other things you can do at the end game or fates that might go beyond. Do you become some eternal monarch? Do you evolve into something else? Do you just stay here as the rulers of the court? Probably could have been a lot of different directions with it.
Yeah.
But we will also play that game of Immortals, and looking forward to making some titles for that one.
Yes.
This book's been a delight, and it's a little sad to see that we are at the end of the original line, but I'm also happy that there's a lot more books in it that they went on to make.
I've got so many more. Yeah, still great overall. And in the meantime, if people want to reach out and leave comments or ask questions or give suggestions or whatever for the other upcoming books or anything else Changeling related, we've got some social media spaces in which to do that. I say spaces, I mean domains that you'll have to reach through the wide road or something.
BriarNet, excuse me, is what it's referred to once we get to
perfect.
Changing Second Edition. Yes, BriarNet is the thing.
Let the thorns tug at you as you enter our Discord at discord.me/CTP. Send us an email at podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. We're on Facebook and YouTube under Changeling the Podcast, Mastodon at changelingpod@dice.camp, and on Patreon, patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. Once again, I have been Pooka.
And I am Fetch.
And just to quote Lewis Carroll, Alice asked the Cheshire Cat, who was sitting in a tree, "What road do I take?" The cat asked, "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know," Alice answered. "Then," said the cat, "it really doesn't matter, does it?"
When it comes to fine dining along Arcadian paths, it's generally a truism that the wide road has more options. You might visit the Literati Cafe, serving single-origin coffees from fictional islands, including organic Genosha and shade-grown Aberot blend, or the Diner of Aerosolized Uncertainties, where everything from the turkey club to the French onion soup is whipped into a light foam that mutters ominously. The narrow road, on the other hand, features hole-in-the-wall, or more properly, hollow-in-the-hedge, indie joints like the Mobius Lodge, where you can get an infinite stack of two-dimensional pancakes topped with fractalberry syrup, but you have to eat it with an impossible trident fork. Our own culinary explorations and reports are supported by our deliciously foodie patrons to whom we extend our heartiest thanks, namely, Bad Company, Siglosson Jr., Derek, Dorcadus, Ellerus, Henry Kraft, Bull, Oreo, Ros Caboose, Sandjigger, Sija, the crew of Erebus, and Ware Buffalo. You too can join this esteemed crowd by signing up at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. And we also appreciate reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience. If you should find yourself traveling into Faerie, may your own journey be safe and pleasant. Remember to tip your hobgoblin waitress, and until next time, keep on dreaming.